Okay, so you know that feeling when you walk into like an antique shop and it's like the air itself is sort of kind of buzzing with stories? You get that tingle, like something's watching you.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
Well, you're not alone. You sent in some seriously intriguing material on haunted objects, and I gotta say, I'm hooked.
What's fascinating about this is it's not just about spooky stories, right? It's about us.
Hmm.
It's about how our brains try to make sense of the world, how we grapple with fear and the unknown.
Totally. So you mentioned a few infamous objects in your notes. Annabelle, the Dybbuk Box, Robert the Doll. These are like the A-listers of the haunted object world.
Precisely, each with its own chilling backstory that's captured the public imagination.
For sure.
Yeah.
Okay, let's start with Annabelle. She's practically a celebrity in the world of creepy dolls. What is it about her story that you find so compelling?
Well, for one, she's not some ancient artifact locked away in a museum. She's a seemingly ordinary Raggedy Ann doll,
Oh.
which makes her all the more unsettling. But the stories of violence associated with her, the claims that she moves on her own.
And the fact that she's kept locked up tight, even blessed regularly. You'd think if it were just a doll, they'd have tossed her in a yard sale by now. What do you make of that?
It speaks to a belief that some objects might hold a power that we don't fully understand, a power that needs to be contained.
Okay, now we have to talk about the Dybbuk Box. It's like this plain-looking wine cabinet, but its reputation precedes it. What is a Dybbuk anyway?
So in Jewish folklore, a Dybbuk is a malevolent spirit that can possess a living person. The box is said to contain one such entity, and it's been blamed for all sorts of misfortune. Illness, financial ruin, you name it.
And it blew up on eBay, right?
Okay.
Which just adds this whole layer of modern-day intrigue to the mix. Is this real or some elaborate internet hoax?
Exactly. It highlights how these stories can so easily go viral, fueled by fear and speculation.
Okay, last but not least, we have Robert the Doll. He looks kind of like a sailor, right? But apparently you don't want to mess with him.
That's right. He belonged to an artist named Robert Eugene Otto. And the story goes that Robert, the doll, is responsible for all sorts of mischief. Accidents, objects moving mysteriously.
But here's the part that always gets me. People write apology letters to the doll, like, sorry, Robert, for not asking your permission to take your picture.
It's almost as if people feel a sense of obligation, a fear of reprisal if they don't treat the doll with respect.
It's a lot of pressure.
It is.
So we've got these three iconic objects, each with their own spooky stories. But what ties them together? Why do these tales continue to fascinate and maybe even terrify us?
I think that's where the psychology of belief comes in.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Okay, let's unpack that. So we've talked about these creepy dolls and mysterious boxes, but what's happening in our minds when we hear these stories? Why are we so quick to jump to the supernatural explanation?
Well, our brains are wired to find patterns to connect the dots. When something unexplainable happens, we naturally search for a reason, a cause. And sometimes the easiest explanation is a supernatural one.
Right, right. Like if my toast burns in the morning, it's easier to blame it on like a mischievous poltergeist than to admit I forgot to adjust the toaster settings.
Exactly. That's a
Okay.
great example. It speaks to the idea of the power of suggestion. If you're already primed to believe in haunted objects, you're more likely to attribute any strange occurrences to that belief.
Okay.
Yeah.
So going back to your research on the Dybbuk Box, if you stumble upon a website detailing all the horrible things that happened to its previous owners, it might make you a little hesitant to bid on it, right? Even if it's just a really nice antique wine cabinet.
Absolutely. And this ties into another psychological factor, confirmation bias. We tend to seek out information that confirms our existing beliefs while downplaying or ignoring evidence that contradicts them.
So you might brush off any stories about the Dybbuk Box's perfectly normal history and focus on the ones with bad luck and misfortune. It's like when you're reading online reviews for a movie, you're more likely to trust the ones that align with your initial gut feeling.
Precisely. And then there's belief perseverance. This is the tendency to stick to our beliefs, even when presented with evidence that disproves them.
So even if you saw a documentary showing how the Dybbuk Box stories were fabricated, you might still have that nagging doubt in the back of your mind, like, but what if?
Exactly. Our beliefs, especially those tied to deeply ingrained fears, can be incredibly resilient.
It's almost as if the fear itself becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. We're so afraid of these objects that we start to see danger everywhere. It's like that feeling when you're walking alone at night and every shadow seems menacing.
Yeah. That's a perfect segue into the next part of our discussion, the role of fear itself in perpetuating these beliefs. Fear has a way of amplifying our senses. making us hyper-aware of our surroundings.
Right, so our brains are basically hardwired to kind of jump to conclusions, especially when we're spooked, like that primal fight or flight response.
Exactly. Think about it this way. You're walking through a forest at dusk. Your senses are heightened. And every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves makes you jump. That's fear amplifying your perception of potential threats, even if they're not really there.
Right, but how does that tie back to, like, Annabelle the doll? I mean, I'm not exactly encountering her in a dark forest.
Because that same heightened awareness, that same fear response, can be triggered by anything we perceive as potentially dangerous, even an inanimate object. We start to look for evidence to confirm our fears, and our imaginations fill in the blanks.
Oh, okay, so if I'm already creeped out by Annabelle's story and then I hear a noise in my house, I might be more inclined to think, oh no, it's the doll,
Right.
rather than, oh, it's probably just the wind.
Precisely. It's the fear of the unknown that's so potent. We have this innate desire to explain the unexplainable. And sometimes attributing it to a supernatural force is more comforting than confronting the true randomness of the universe.
Which might explain why we've been telling these kinds of stories for centuries. I mean, we've moved on from vengeful spirits to haunted dolls. But the underlying themes seem pretty similar.
Absolutely. Think about the curse of King Tut's tomb. Those stories of misfortune and death following the people who opened it. It's a classic example of how fear and superstition can take hold, even in the face of logical explanations.
And then there's the Hope Diamond, which is supposedly cursed to bring bad luck to its owner. It's interesting how these tales pop up across cultures and throughout history.
Exactly. From ancient curses to modern-day haunted objects. This human fascination with these stories kind of speaks to a universal truth. We're all a little bit afraid of the dark, of what we don't understand.
So we've explored the history of haunted objects, the psychology behind our belief in them, and the powerful role that fear plays in these stories. What's the takeaway? What do you want our listener to walk away with today?
I think the most important takeaway is that these stories, whether we believe them or not, tell us something profound about the human experience. They remind us of our capacity for wonder, our need to make sense of the world, and yes, our vulnerability in the face of the unknown.
That's beautifully said. It's like these objects and the stories we tell about them hold up a mirror to our deepest fears and fascinations. They make us question what we believe and why we believe it.
And ultimately, I think that's a good thing. It encourages us to be more critical thinkers, to question our assumptions, and to approach the world with a healthy dose of skepticism and wonder.
I love that. So the next time you hear a story about a haunted object, don't just dismiss it as nonsense. Take a moment to consider what it reveals about our shared human experience, our hopes, our fears, and our enduring fascination with the mysteries of the universe. Until next time, keep exploring. But maybe leave the lights on.